Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a true honor for me to speak in this very important forum and on a topic I think is hotly debated in the world. That is the Belt and Road Initiative proposed by President Xi Jinping in 2013. And in my short interventions, I'd like to discuss what is the motivation behind China's proposal for this initiative. And the second, why this initiative has caught so much attention in the world. And then, what will be the impacts of this initiative on the developing country in the world. I think the main reason for China to propose this initiative is, first, China now is the second largest economy in the world. And China is also the largest trading country in the world. And very likely, by the time of 2025, China will be a high-income country. So China should behave like other high-income countries to shoulder more development cooperation for the developing country, to make a contribution to the improvement of the well-being in the developing world. And we know, after the Second World War, the advanced country, now mostly the OECD countries, they had contributed about $4.7 trillion to support the development cooperation through multilateral development institutions like the World Bank, like UNDP, and the regional development corporations like Asian Development Bank, Latin America Development Banks, and African Development Banks. But also bilateral development institutions like USAID, DFID of UK, and JICA of Japan, and so on. So in terms of money contribution, it's huge. And they all have good intention to help the developing country. And certainly China can follow what the high-income countries are doing today. If China did that, there will be no debate, no much discussion at all. However, the reason for China to make a contribution is also because we really want to help. And so we need to evaluate what is the effect when the high-income countries spend $4.7 trillion to help the developing world. And if we evaluate the performance, actually, it's quite disappointing. We know after the Second World War, there were about 200 developing economies. So far, only 2 moved from low income to high income. One is South Korea, and the other one is the place where I was born, Taiwan, China. Among 200 developing economies. In 1960s, there were 101 middle-income economies. By the time I was the chief economist of the World Bank in 2008, only 13 of them moved up to become high income. And among those 13, 8 were European countries surrounding Western Europe, like Spain, Portugal, Greece. Their income level with the advanced Western European country was rather small, or oil-producing country. The other 5 are Japan, Korea, and Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore. So from this evidence, in spite of so much money has been spent on the so-called development corporations, but after the Second World War, most developing economies has been trapped in low income or medium income for now almost 3 generations. And what was the reason why, with good intention and so much money spent, and we did not reach a world without poverty? I think it was because the program they provide have good intention, but may not have good result. We know development cooperation today mostly are in the area of humanitarian aids, like education and health, or human rights, like gender equality, or civil societies and so on, or governance, the transparency and democracies. All of them certainly are desirable. But if we want to help the country to develop, to get rid of poverty, we need to create jobs. And we need to help them to transform from low-income, agrarian, resources-based economy to modern industrialized economies. And in this process, certainly every country has some bottlenecks. If development corporations are used to help the recipient country to remove the bottleneck of their structural transformation, then those kind of money will be very effective. And in China, we have a saying. That is, if you want to get rich, build the road first. That is, improve the infrastructure first. And at the same time, we travel in the developing country. I think it's so obvious, the bottleneck for the growth of the developing country, the bottleneck for the transformation of the developing country, it's infrastructure. And that's the reason why in 2013, August, President Xi Jinping proposed the Silk Road Economic Zone in Kazakhstan. And in October, when he visited Indonesia, he proposed the 21st Maritime Silk Road, and proposed to use infrastructure connectivity as the way for development cooperation. It's a new thinking, and based on the experiences and also the theory. And infrastructure is important. I think most people will agree. And even US also understands that. So under Obama administration in 2011, US proposed the new Silk Road and proposed to use infrastructure connectivity to link the 5 Central Asian countries together with Afghanistan and to find an access to Indian Ocean. In the same year, he also proposed India-Pacific Economic Corridor, again to use infrastructure to link India and the Pacific region. They are all infrastructure initiatives. But today, if I do not mention these 2 initiatives from US, I think most people would forget it. But China, when China proposed the Belt and Road Initiative, it received a lot of support. For example, in 2015, China proposed to set up Asian Infrastructure Bank. At that time, there's a lot of resistance or pressure from US for countries not to join. But at the end, 57 countries became the founding members of this new development institutions. including UK, France, Germany, and so on. And now it has more than 100 members in this bank. And second only to the World Bank. And how come similar initiative from China receives so much attention? And an initiative with almost the same contents from the US, people did not pay attention to. I think it was because China has some competitive advantages in infrastructure building. Because today, China is still at the stage of building infrastructure domestically. And China produce half of the steel in the world, half of the cement in the world. And the engineer capacity in China is the best in the world. US has passed that stage. US may be good at the infrastructure after the Second World War, but they phase out that capacity altogether already. Secondly, China had $3 trillion of reserve. In the past, those reserves was used to buy US Treasury bill or invest in the US stock market. And the return to the US Treasury bill in real terms is negative. And the stock market in the US is so volatile, and everyone knows correction will come someday. So in this regard, the reserve can be used to invest in infrastructure as long as you have good design of infrastructure, well chosen the location and the project. It can have a very high return. So China can use that as a SIP money to support infrastructure investment in the country involved. And third, equally important, if we observe those a few successful countries to transform from poverty to prosperities, they all started, or they all capture a window of opportunities in this transformation. That is the global reallocation of labor-intensive industries. After the Second World War, Japan captured the windows. At that time, US lost the competitive advantages in labor-intensive industry due to the high income, high wages. Japan transformed. In the 1960s, 1970s, the Japanese wage rate rose. Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, and some other, like Indonesia, Thailand, also captured that opportunities. And they became newly industrialized. And in the 1980s, when China started the transition from a planned economy to a market economy, the wage rate in China was very low. At that time, 81% of the population in China lived in the countryside. And then the wage rate in the newly industrialized Asian economies increased. China captured the opportunity to go into the labor-intensive industries. And now China reached the stage to relocate its labor-intensive industry. As I mentioned, most likely by the time of 2025, China will be a high-income country. And China definitely will follow the Flying Geese pattern to relocate its industry to other low-income countries. But the size this time is very different. In 1960s, Japan employed 9.7 million workers in manufacturing. In 1980s, South Korea employed 2.3 million workers in manufacturing. Taiwan employed 1.5 million, Hong Kong 1 million, Singapore 500,000. Combined, only 5.1 million. This time, China currently employs 124 million workers in manufacturing. Among them, 85 million are in light manufacturing, in labor-intensive manufacturing. China will lose competitive advantages in those kind of sectors within 10 years. China will vacate the space of 85 million labor-intensive workers for the other lower-income country. Currently, African country only employ 10 million workers in manufacturing. And India, less 10 million. The low-income countries combined, less than 25 million workers. So this time, all the developing countries, if they have a right strategy, right approach, they can jumpstart this transformation simultaneously. The space is large enough for all the developing countries to jumpstart their structural transformation from a low-income, agrarian, resources-based economy to modern industrialized economy. Certainly, to capture that opportunity, you need to have infrastructure. And I think this is an opportunity to achieve the goal, a world free of poverty. And I think that's the reason why, in spite of all kinds of suspicion, all kinds of debates, the Belt and Road Initiative is supported by so many countries. But it's not only an opportunity for the developing country, it's an opportunity for high-income country also. Not only because this initiative may finally let the world to have a common prosperity, but also what needed in a high-income country today is growth. And to growth, we know high-income country, the domestic economy, the demand is growing sluggish. If they want to create jobs, they want to grow, they need to have a dynamic expanding of the global markets. And the markets will come from the developing country if they grow dynamically. So the Belt and Road Initiative is an initiative for the future. The global initiative is an initiative to achieve the dream of common prosperity. Thank you.
So Justin, before we let you go, you
Yep.
talked about China and the developing world, but if you come back to this region, we have, as you talked about, Korea, Japan, and China in this
Yeah.
region, and you know that combined power is always the biggest power. The three countries in the region have, for many years and for many decades, have tried to work out an economic cooperation in this region,
Yeah.
but have not been able to do so. Do you see in the future that in this region, the economic cooperation will finally come about, and what can we do if you do see that vision?
Well, certainly that's my hope and that's my dream, because East Asian economies, they are complementary to each other. And economic cooperation certainly is good for China, for Korea, for Japan, and for the world, because if we have a better cooperation, if we grow more dynamically, we create market for other countries. But in the past, there are some barriers. The barrier is international politics. East Asian is divided in the front of the Cold War, and politics stand as a barrier for further cooperation. But reason we have to be the front of the Cold War. Why not we become a basis for a warm world? Because fundamentally, what people want is prosperity. What people want is better futures. And if we can find a way to have a further integrations, then certainly it contributes to our prosperity, but also the prosperity in the world. And in the past, it was a Cold War imposed by other people. And it's time for us to remove that. And I think a forum like this will be a good platform to explore the common prosperity, common future for all of us.